On November 22, 1963, at exactly 12:29 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was riding through the streets of Dallas, Texas in an open-top limousine. Sitting beside him was his wife, Jackie, the First Lady of the United States. Thousands of people had come out of their homes to catch a glimpse of the young, charismatic president. Kennedy was smiling, waving to the crowd. But just 1 minute after that moment,
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
President John F. Kennedy was assassinated with a rifle fired by this man. But that man was also killed just 2 days after the assassination. And that's when the assassination of John F. Kennedy turned into one of the most complex cases in history. The world started asking, why was the killer eliminated before he could stand trial? Who was really behind Kennedy's death? The Soviets, Cuba, Israel, or was it America itself? Today's story is filled with twists that will genuinely shock you, especially when you find out who the real killer actually was. I'm Narrator X, and today we're diving into the assassination that changed the world forever. Now, while this video is mainly about the assassination of JFK, we can't really talk about what happened that day without first understanding who JFK was. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, or simply JFK, was the 35th President of the United States. He was born in 1917 and raised in a very wealthy family. His father was a millionaire, which meant John grew up living an ideal life, even during one of the hardest times in America's history. The world had just come out of World War I, the economy was in ruins, and millions of Americans were living in poverty and hunger due to the Great Depression that hit in the late 1920s. But none of that affected John, thanks to his family's wealth. Still, life wasn't perfect. As a young man, JFK suffered from multiple health issues, including problems with his digestive system and his spine. For long periods of time, he was stuck in bed receiving treatment, and during that time, while lying in bed, John began reading. And that's where a new side of him was born, a side that would grow deeply interested in politics.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
In the early 1940s, John was in his mid-20s, serving as an officer in the U.S. Navy. At the same time, America had officially entered World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And, as we all know, the war ended with the U.S. victorious. After devastating Japan, John Kennedy, who served in some of the most dangerous zones in the Pacific Ocean, was awarded several medals for his bravery during the war. Then, in the early 1950s, JFK's name started to rise quickly in American politics, and to be honest, his father played a big part in that. He helped John make powerful connections, funded his early efforts, and shaped him into a public figure. John, for his part, genuinely loved politics, and at a very young age, still in his early 30s, he managed to get elected to both the House of Representatives and later the Senate. His youth, his family name, his reputation as a World War II hero, and his good looks gave him huge popularity and charisma, both with the public and the media. Keep in mind, we're talking about the 1950s here. Television was still a brand new invention, and most American politicians had no idea how to handle themselves on camera. But JFK did. He knew exactly how to present himself on TV, and that helped him build a massive following toward the end of the 1950s. Then came 1960. Kennedy ran for president against Richard Nixon. Now, let's be real. Nixon had way more political experience than the young JFK, but in the end, John Kennedy won the presidency. There were many reasons for that, but one of the biggest was television. More specifically, the televised presidential debate between Kennedy and Nixon. JFK looked calm and confident, even crossing his legs as he spoke, while Nixon came off as stiff, nervous, and uncomfortable.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
So now, John F. Kennedy had officially become the 35th President of the United States and the youngest president in American history. The presidents before Kennedy were often overly serious. They spoke in stiff political language, delivered harsh speeches in rough voices, but Kennedy he was completely different. He had a natural connection with the public. His speeches were clear, powerful, and relatable. But I want you to remember something important. We're in the year 1960 now, and 1960 was the peak of the Cold War, a time when tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were at an all-time high. So when JFK entered office, he was shocked by what the military and intelligence leadership in the U.S. was actually doing. America was interfering in foreign wars, backing coups, even assassinating leaders in different parts of the world. Basically, when Kennedy stepped into the Oval Office, he was stunned by the sheer number of dirty operations the U.S. was involved in. So, the man wanted to change a lot of things. Kennedy fired and cut the salaries of many top officials, people he believed were abusing America's power. Then came the moment JFK crossed a line that was considered taboo in American politics. He began negotiating with the Soviets. He started talking about global peace. And like we said, moves like that were absolute red lines for certain American leaders. That's when danger began to circle around the man. On November 22, 1963, it was a clear, sunny fall day across the United States. President John F. Kennedy arrived in the city of Dallas, Texas, to deliver a speech in front of the public. He stepped off the plane and into an open-top limousine, riding beside his wife, Jackie, who was also deeply admired by women across America. Thousands of people gathered along the streets to see the president and his wife. Kennedy was clearly enjoying the moment, smiling, waving to the crowds, and then, suddenly, three gunshots were fired at the president's motorcade. The first missed, the second hit his upper back, the third struck his head directly and killed him. The president was rushed to the hospital, where he was officially pronounced dead at exactly 1 p.m. Dallas time. Panic spread like wildfire. The entire country was gripped by shock and fear, and within just 2 hours, authorities arrested the primary suspect. That suspect was a former Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old who had once renounced his American citizenship, left the military, and moved to the Soviet Union in 1959. But after 3 years living in Russia, Oswald returned to the United States and began planning the president's assassination. At some point, he bought a rifle, prepared his plan, and learned the exact route of the presidential motorcade. Then, on November 22, 1963, he made his way to the 6th floor of this building, set up his weapon, and fired 3 shots at the president from a distance of 81 meters. Moments later, Oswald fled the scene. During his escape, he shot and killed a police officer in broad daylight. Eventually, he hid inside a movie theater, where he was finally captured by city police. Now, despite being arrested with the murder weapon, Oswald claimed he was innocent. He insisted that he hadn't shot anyone.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. You have a lawyer? No, sir.
But the reality was, John F. Kennedy was dead, and within just a few short hours, the entire country knew. Leaders from around the world began arriving in Washington to offer their condolences. Meanwhile, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as the next president of the United States aboard Air Force One, with a terrified and grieving Jackie Kennedy at his side. Within hours, U.S. intelligence concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was the killer. They believed he acted alone, motivated by personal reasons and communist sympathies. But hold on, that's not how things are supposed to work. Even if U.S. intelligence, including the CIA, were convinced that Oswald was the shooter, the law still had to take its course. There needed to be a trial, and that's exactly what the American people expected. A public trial for Lee Harvey Oswald, a chance for the country to learn who was truly behind their president's assassination and why it happened. But that never happened, because just 2 days after the Kennedy assassination, while Oswald was being transferred from the police station to the city jail, a man suddenly stepped out of the crowd, pulled a gun, and shot Oswald in front of police officers, journalists, and live television cameras. Oswald was rushed to the hospital, and shortly after, his death was announced. He died in the exact same hospital where President Kennedy had died 48 hours earlier. A 24-year-old man allegedly kills the president, publicly denies it. Then, 2 days later, a random man, completely unknown to the public, shows up and kills the accused assassin. Yeah, this needs an explanation. After President Kennedy's funeral, newly sworn-in President Lyndon B. Johnson formed a special committee known as the Warren Commission. Its job was to explain to the American people why their president had been killed. And after a short period of investigation, the Warren Commission released its findings. They stated, with certainty, that President John F. Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone and driven by personal motives. Okay. Sounds somewhat believable, but if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed something strange. The Warren Commission's version of events was identical to the CIA's version of events, which had already been released the very same day Kennedy was killed. Anyway, the commission concluded that all 3 shots fired at Kennedy came from this building. They claimed the first shot missed entirely. The second bullet, this is where things get weird, entered Kennedy's upper back, exited through his chest, then struck the man sitting in front of him, the governor of Texas. That same bullet, according to the report, entered the governor's back, exited his chest, went through his wrist, and finally lodged into his thigh. That's a single bullet, causing 7 separate wounds. The third and final shot hit Kennedy in the head and killed him instantly. So, how did investigators know there were only 3 shots? Simple. That's how many shell casings were found at the scene. 3 bullets. End of story. And that, right there, became the official version of events, the official U.S. government narrative. But, from the very beginning, millions of people didn't buy it. It just didn't add up. A 24-year-old kid kills the president using an old bolt-action rifle, and he did it all alone. Without help? Really? Many believed there were multiple shooters. Meaning this wasn't just a personal attack. It was a conspiracy, a coup, something much bigger than one man. Still, the American public had one burning question. Who was the man who suddenly appeared and killed Oswald before he could even stand trial? The U.S. government responded quickly. The man was Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner in Dallas. And why did he kill Oswald? Because, according to the official explanation, Jack Ruby was heartbroken over what Jacqueline Kennedy had gone through. He admired her and didn't want her to suffer any longer knowing that her husband's killer was still alive. When asked why he did it, Ruby said simply, "I was a big fan of Jacqueline Kennedy, and I didn't want her to be sad anymore. So I killed the man who killed her husband." Yeah, sounds a little off, right? Still, the government tried to bury the story, tried to make people forget. But 12 years later, this case would be reopened from the ground up. In 1975, for the first time ever, a video showing the exact moment of Kennedy's assassination was broadcast on national television. The footage had been captured randomly by a citizen named Abraham Zapruder. Unfortunately, I can't show you the video here, but it changed everything because it clearly showed that Kennedy was shot in the head from the front. When the bullet struck, his head snapped backward, which meant the shot came from this direction, from the front. Not from behind, not from the building where Oswald had been. On top of that, newly released audio recordings confirmed that 4 shots had been fired, not 3. This directly contradicted the official U.S. version of events. And as a result, the U.S. government was forced to reopen the case. And that's where a whole new chapter begins. The Zapruder Film forced the authorities to take another look, especially since, like we said, most Americans had already lost trust in their government and didn't believe the official narrative to begin with. Many were convinced it was a conspiracy, a major one, especially after what happened 5 years later. President Kennedy's younger brother, Robert Kennedy, was also assassinated. And Robert wasn't just JFK's brother. He was also a presidential candidate at the time, and most likely would have won due to his massive popularity. So, in 1976, the U.S. government formed a new committee to reopen the investigation into JFK's assassination. And in 1979, the committee concluded President Kennedy was most likely killed as the result of a conspiracy, and that at least 2 shooters were involved, not 1. This was a radical shift. It changed the official version. It rewrote American history and shattered public trust in the government. But even then, the U.S. government didn't tell the people who was actually behind it all. They left the door open, and the theories flooded in. Some said it was the Soviet Union. Others believed it was Cuba, trying to retaliate for U.S. attempts to assassinate their leader, Fidel Castro. Some believed Israel was behind it, claiming JFK had clashed with Israeli leadership multiple times. But in the early 1990s, a new theory gained major attention. A film titled JFK was released, and it portrayed the assassination as part of an American conspiracy to kill the president. The movie made waves, and many saw it as a kind of indirect confession from the U.S. government. Following the film's release, the U.S. government declassified 5 million documents related to the Kennedy assassination. But even within those 5 million pages, not a single document revealed the true killer. So, the American people came to one conclusion. Whoever killed the president is the same entity that's been hiding the truth since 1963, and that entity is America itself, its military leadership, its intelligence agencies, the very people JFK had opposed. So, what about Oswald and Jack Ruby? Most likely, they were just pawns in the game, victims of a larger setup. And in fact, that's exactly what Oswald said just hours before he died.
I'm just a patsy.
He called himself a patsy, an American slang term that means scapegoat. He literally said, "I'm just a patsy."
I'm just a patsy.
And that's the story I had for you today. A massive story, a conspiracy. And while I personally don't always buy into conspiracy theories, this one, to this day, still hasn't been resolved. The American people still talk about it every November. They still ask the same questions. Why was John F. Kennedy killed? And who really did it? So if you want to read more about it, I'll leave all the sources in the video description, including a link to those 5 million documents. And if you have time to read 5 million pages, I'm sure you've got time to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the previous videos, all of which are packed with wild and important stories. Thank you for watching. This is Narrator X, and I'll see you in the next video.